Today is Monday, June 16th, 2014. My name is Sandy Jones Garrison, and I will be interviewing George Pratt of Buxton, North Carolina. His wife Sharon has agreed to be present during the interview. The interview location is at their home on Flowers Ridge Road in Buxton. George and Sharon are both retired and have made their home on Hatteras Island. George is a longtime member of the Cape Hatteras Anglers Club and is an avid fisherman. He is also interested in genealogy and spends his time traveling across the country to research his family. He is a self-taught carpenter, designs, creates furniture for his home. He is a man who loves to dance. Sharon is also involved in the Cape Hatteras Anglers Club and is a volunteer with the Meals on Wheels program. She fishes, frequently plays cards with her friends, spends time on the beach, travels, opens her home routinely to family and friends, is George's dance partner, and is a member of the Beach Chair Book Club. George, I'll start with you. Can you just state your full name and your place of birth?
My name is George William Pratt. That's George, capital William, capital Pratt. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia on September 25th, 1944. I'm currently 69 years old.
Okay. And did you grow up in the area where you were born?
I grew up in Atlanta, yes.
Okay.
I stayed there until I was approximately 23 years of age. I went to high school there, graduated from Georgia State University in Atlanta, and then went on to the University of Georgia.
And what was your profession?
I taught in the Sociology and Anthropology Department at Georgia Southern University in Statesboro, Georgia. I was there for approximately 30 years.
At any time were you a part of the armed services or military branch?
Yes, I was drafted into the military in 1967 and spent 2 years in the military.
Okay. You retired after 30 years?
Yes.
Is that correct? And that's when you decided to move to this area?
My last day of work, I worked and then came up here the next day. It was just a normal fishing trip for me. It was in December. I retired in January, as of January 1st, 2000. But the month before, I went on vacation, and as usual, my vacation in December was to come up to Cape Hatteras. I just finished my work, graded my exams, turned my grades in, and left.
Sharon, so I'm going to ask you the same questions. Can you state your full name and where you were born, and if you could spell it for me?
It's Sharon Teresa Nash Pratt, SHARON, TERESA, NASH, PRATT. And I was born in Miami, Florida, October 28th, 1943.
And is that where you grew up?
We lived there until about the age of 5. I was 5. We moved to Lithonia, Georgia, which is where my father spent most of his growing up time. And then we moved to Decatur, Georgia, which is outside of Atlanta, where that was most of the time. That's where I grew up, there.
All right. Then how did the two of you cross paths?
We met at Georgia State University in class.
Okay.
Dated and married in 1967.
And you continued to live in Georgia after you were married?
Well, he was drafted right around the time we got married, and he ended up being stationed in Albuquerque, New Mexico, working in a hospital. And I moved there, and we had our first and only child during the time we lived there. Then we went back to Georgia.
And what is your child's name?
Eden, E-D-E-N.
Okay. And do you have grandchildren?
I do. 2 grandchildren.
And what are their names?
Tatum and Piper.
Okay. Do they live in Georgia? Or?
No, they live in
Well, George, tell me when you mentioned that after 30 years you were pretty much down here the day after you retired. When did you first started visiting Hatteras Island, and where did you particularly go?
My first trip to Hatteras was in 1971. A colleague of mine that I taught with had just started teaching at Georgia Southern University. And we both liked to fish, and we got into a conversation, and he said, I think we ought to go to Hatteras over Christmas break. Said it's a wonderful place if you like to fish and go. And so he convinced me we should go. And we got in a car and came up here for a 3-day visit. And we came to Buxton. We stayed at Edgar Hooper's hotel right as you come into Buxton from the north. At that time, it was just a group of little cabins. They weren't as big as they are nowadays. And we stayed with Edgar. And I remember first day I'd bought one fishing pole, one fishing reel, and about 3 lures. I was not really prepared, but we drove out to what's now Ramp 44 and walked across the beach and walked out to the point. We didn't have 4-wheel drive in those days. And my first experience was walking over the dune into the fog and seeing birds come out of the fog and then go disappear back into the fog in a circular pattern. And I went out there and started casting one of my lures and caught 4 15 to 20 pound bluefish. And that was my first experience, and I was hooked from that point. We picked up our fish and walked up and down the beach. And I remember that day too, because those fish got heavy towards the end of the day. But Ray Couch, who owned the Red Drum service station and tackle shop at that time, had driven out and was checking, and he brought us in. Very nice.
Was that the first time you had met Mr. Couch?
First time I'd met Mr. Couch.
Did he do that routinely? Drive out and pick up stray fishermen?
Not routinely, but it was very nice. Edgar Hooper would do it for his guests every now and then. He would just ride out to check, because there weren't very many people staying here at that time. And he would drive out, and you'd see, I can't remember his name, Mr. Connors, who owned Connors grocery store at the time. He would drive out occasionally, smoking his pipe. You'd see him coming out, and he'd oftentimes offer people like us a ride in. It wasn't too many years. I think 2 years later, we eventually got a 4-wheel drive vehicle to bring up.
I was going to ask you what they drove out on the beach. What vehicle were they driving?
Well, everybody that had a Jeep Grand Cherokee or a Jeep Cherokee or a Grand Cherokee, or they all had Jeeps of one kind or another. Usually, most of the people that lived here, or a pickup truck with 4-wheel drive. Not everybody came with pickups with 4-wheel drive. Some people drove a wide variety of different kinds of vehicles out on the beach. Some of them were pickup trucks, and they would bring large farm tires and put on them and run the air way down and then drive out. And you could get a ride with those people easily. They'd throw you in the back of the pickup, because if they got stuck, they needed somebody to jump out and help them push.
But you never saw regular cars with the pressure release from their tires. It was definitely beach-going vehicles.
Most of them were beach-going vehicles, or vehicles that were modified to go on the beach. You saw Volkswagens every now and then pull out, because they were fairly good in the sand. And every now and then you saw a heavily modified beach vehicle, or somebody that had really taken the junker and changed it and modified it in major ways. But there were no Model A's or other old vehicles like you hear about.
You said that you stayed at Edgar Hooper's hotel. When you're coming into Buxton, would that be on the left?
I think his son John Robert owns the land now, John Robert Hooper.
All right.
So it's the 3rd motel coming down.
Lighthouse View.
The Lighthouse View.
Lighthouse View. Okay.
Over the years, we also stayed with Carol Dillon in her hotel right there also.
When you stayed for that 3-day visit, where did you cook, or did you go out to eat?
We cooked.
Okay.
I remember the groceries were horribly expensive back then. I mean, relative to today they weren't, but they were horribly expensive. So literally we would go shopping for years. We would go shopping and buy our groceries before we came here, and mainly cook. Most of the restaurants were closed. Once you hit Manio, most of the restaurants in Manio were even closed at that time. And there was hardly anything open here. There was no place you could go out to eat.
Because of the season, or just because the community couldn't support?
No, it was in December.
It was December.
And that's usually when we would come, as soon as school let out for Christmas break, usually somewhere around the 3rd to the 10th of December.
So when did you return?
When did I return? I came every year from 1971 until I eventually moved here in 2001. So for 20 years.
Always in the off season?
No, eventually began to come almost whenever school was out. When it let out in the spring, or at the end of the spring, between the spring quarter and if I was teaching summer school, which I usually was. We had 2 weeks off then. We had at the end of the summer we had a month off, and in December we had a month off. I very rarely came in March. There just wasn't much happening or going on here at that time. But I came in December, it got up to a group of about 6 men. We all came together. We would run a house or rent rooms at Carol Dillon's and stay for up to a week in December. And then sometimes I would come in at the end of August, between end of August and September, and stay for a week.
Did you take your fish back with you? I mean, did you prepare it to take it back to your home, or you ate it, or you gave it away?
Both, all of those things.
Okay.
When we first started coming here in the early days, the main attraction was the large bluefish. That was spectacular. You could go out on the beach some days during that period and catch up to 50 fish if you wanted to, but most of those went back in the water. Some bluefish are good, but you couldn't tell which one was good and which one was bad. They'd been feeding on menhaden. Just huge schools of menhaden used to come along the coast at that time, usually starting around Thanksgiving and continuing sometime up into the first week in January, and the fish would come in to eat on those. So it was just a spectacular scene to see all the fish and the bluefish riding the waves into the beach, and huge schools of bluefish.
Do you see that now?
No.
So has changed?
The last year, I think I saw that was probably 1996 or 1997. And after 97, there was a good run of striped bass that would come in, rockfish that would come down. Those were not quite as good to catch. They didn't fight as much, but they were much better to eat. So we had, I guess from about 97 to maybe 2004 or 5, we had a good run of rockfish come in that you could fish for during the wintertime.
What other fish did you enjoy catching?
I love speckled trout. And I love Spanish mackerel. I like the fish that you stand there and cast lures at.
Okay.
I don't particularly like standing out on the beach and pitching a bait out and sitting in my truck and waiting.
Okay. Do you have a favorite rod and reel that you use?
No. I mean, different fish take different tactics. It's like, would you go out and play golf with a putter? I mean, you have to have an arsenal of various kinds of rods and reels to cast various kinds of presentations to the fish.
So how many rods and reels do you have?
I don't know. I haven't counted them recently. I have lots and lots.
Okay.
I have at least 15 or 20 rods and probably twice that many reels.
When you said the bluefish fed on the menhaden, and there seemed to be a change as years progressed, is it because of the feeder fish? Is that the loss of them, or?
I believe it is. We had huge factory boats that came up from Morehead City and down from Chesapeake Bay in Virginia that still are allowed to fish for them. They're right now cleaning out the bay up in Virginia, Chesapeake Bay. They're not regulated by the fishing service in Virginia. They got out of that, so they're different somehow. But they really just decimated the fish. You don't see the huge schools you used to see. The striped bass still come out of the bay, but they don't travel down because there's nothing to bring them down. It's not as cold as it used to be, and they're not the menhaden. And they're really cleaning up the ocean. They eat everything else now. In a way, I'm glad they don't come, because fishing has really declined over the last few years.
One of the things I wanted to ask you before we talk about beach access, why is the point considered where you go for East Coast fishing, surf fishing?
Just read in the paper today that the point is considered to be the best fishing spot on the East Coast, surf fishing spot. It is. You have two currents coming together. You have not the Humboldt, what's the one? The Labrador current, which is an eddy off the Gulf Stream coming in from the north, and you have the Gulf Stream coming up from the south and just dumping a lot of nutrients. And fish just tend to congregate there. A lot of fish that are migratory have to pass it as they're heading on to other places. Right now, between May and June, there'll be cobia right offshore. Cobia up to 90 pounds, 90, 100 pounds that you can catch from the surf. I don't know of any other place where you can go and catch cobia from the surf. You can also catch Spanish mackerel this time of year as they migrate through. If the winds and tides are right and the bait's there, they'll come through. There are not very many places where you can regularly go and catch Spanish mackerel from the shore. Of course, red drum is the fish that sort of gets the big reputation here in Hatteras. I fished for those all my life. If I can't eat it, I really don't want to fish for it. So the big ones I just sort of leave alone.
Okay. And the red drum, that's North Carolina's
State fish. Yes, correct.
Can you describe to me what it's like, what it was like in the 70s to access the point for fishing, and what it's like now to access the point for fishing, especially in light of intermittent beach closures?
At one time when I was here, first started coming here, all you needed to access the beach was a vehicle, a four-wheel drive vehicle that was licensed, and you had to have a driver's license. That's it. You didn't have to have a fishing license. You didn't have to have a beach permit. You didn't have to have an inspection sticker. You didn't have to have all of these other kinds of things. It was just very simple. You came and you accessed it. Eventually, they added a fishing license, so now you have to have a saltwater fishing license to fish. And then there were certain sections of the beach that were closed even back then. It wasn't for nesting. It was because the beach was considered dangerous and impassable. There was a section, say for example, between Ramp 49 and Frisco that was pretty much closed. They said it was dangerous, but the beach filled out and they started allowing people to drive on it again. But you had access to almost all beaches. There were plenty of birds nesting. You could go out to the point, and at that time colony birds were all over the point, particularly during the summer. You could see large schools or large groups of least terns, common terns, and royal terns nesting there. And it was fun to watch them. You could go out and sit and watch them do their mating flight and watch them land. But the beach was clear. There were no dunes like there are now. You were allowed to drive all in that area during the winter, and it tended to keep the vegetation down. And they evidently needed wide areas of space where they could be visible. I don't know about piping plover. They may have been there too. Used to see the piping plover literally as you drove out to the beach in the ditches next to the ramp at 44. You'd also see them in ditches if they were full of water, feeding along the interdural road, but you never saw them out on the beaches. The other thing you saw was if large birds like what's the one, greater blackbacks, they weren't here during the summertime. If other gulls flew over the nesting terns, they would all come up, chase them away. So they would keep predators away, but they didn't seem to be bothered by people driving through it. The Park Service would, during the summer, cordon off those areas, but you could still have access to the beach and drive on it. And you could sit and watch the birds as they, lived out their life cycle on the beach. But it was very different. Once they started closing that area during the wintertime to driving, it's amazing. It's like the tire tracks had furrowed them and left ruts, and all the seeds landed in, and then dunes jumped up everywhere. So it's almost a bad thing. If you do drive on the beach, you keep the vegetation down. If you stop driving on the beach, you create a lot of vegetation. But those colony birds don't nest out there any longer. But that beach has changed dramatically over the years. It's extended south a great deal.
How do you access the point now when they say a limited closure?
Well, right now
if you want to fish on the point now,
you have to walk there.
And how do you, do you have to keep in the water, or
You're supposed to stay in the water, which I assume is because that's North Carolina's land.
Okay.
The state of North Carolina claims most navigable waters, and so probably up to the. Although it probably hasn't been questioned here. Supposedly, in states, you're to provide access to the beach. You have to provide access, and that's basically North Carolina's property, I would assume, but it's never been tested in court that I know of.
Well, Sharon, I'm going to direct this question to you. So when did you get involved in coming to the beach, and was it to fish with George, or you just...
Well, I think he enjoyed it so much, we came up with another couple one summer. We each had a child and stayed a week, I think, at Lighthouse View.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a family thing, and I really enjoyed the stay. I don't fish that much. Mine's more occasional, but it was just being at the beach, all the things that go with that. Its remoteness. I remember the little cabin we stayed in, didn't have a TV. I thought that was neat. Had a little porch out front, and we'd meet with other couple out. Well, we were together a lot during the day, but we'd sit out on the porch in the afternoon. It was just fun. The kids would play, and it was just very enjoyable. So I liked it from the first time as well.
It's pretty remote down here.
Mm-hmm, it is, and then it seemed even more remote because we didn't have interstate all the way. It took a long time to get here then. I can't remember how many hours it took from there. Today it would be 9 hours, but back then it was 12.
12 to 14.
12 to 14.
And why is that?
Interstate.
Okay.
You had to take a lot of 2-lane roads, and there wasn't a completed 95 at that
Interstate
point.
95 was not complete.
So you would come down, I guess, now in the summers?
Yes. I think we came about every summer for 1 week.
Mm-hmm.
And occasionally then sometimes I would come Christmas break when we both worked at the university. They gave you a week off. So sometimes in the wintertime I would come up here with George for a couple of days between Christmas and New Year's when there was time off. The other time I had to take vacation time, so it was never more than a week.
So when did you start to discussing that this is where you wanted to make your residence after retirement?
About 1992, we were debating building a new house. We were living in an older house in Statesboro, Georgia. And we thought we'd like to build a new one, so we went out and bought some property, bought 4 acres of land, and we're planning to build a house. And the plan was to build the house, then sell it eventually and move up here, but then we decided, well, why not just buy a house up here? So in 1994, we bought a little house, a little salt box down on Robin Lane in Frisco, about 4 or 5 houses back from the beach. Property values were a little bit depressed at that time. So we got a good deal on a house. Not that I wanted to live on the beach. I didn't want to live on the beach. But we bought the house, and we had some tenants that were already in the house living there permanently. So they stayed, and we rented the house to them. We didn't really use the house during the summers or other time since it was permanently rented, but that was fine. Rent was stable. And that's how we eventually did that in 94. I wasn't going to retire. I wasn't even thinking about retiring at that time. But you know how you don't think about it, and then all of a sudden the opportunity rolls around and you say, yes, I'm going to do that. So we had a house, and when I retired in 2000, the tenants left, and I took over the house and had to do a lot of repairs to it after they moved out. So I came up here and stayed 2 or 3 months and repaired the house, got it ready sort of to live in. I had another house in Georgia. I also had a house on the coast in Georgia that I fished out of down near Midway, Georgia, in Liberty County. And I used to fish for red drum off St. Catherine's Island down there every other weekend or so, and trout and sheephead and a lot of other kinds of fish down there. But I had tenants in that house too, and had to go and boot them out and redo that house. I spent about 6 to 9 months getting houses ready, and then we had to sell the house we were in Statesboro and get it ready to sell. So we got those 2 houses sold, and then about 2001 we moved up here permanently.
When you did all the renovations to the house, especially the one in Frisco,
Mm-hmm.
was what you needed accessible? I mean, did you have a building supplier down here? if
Sure.
you needed, so you didn't have to go off island?
No, and they delivered. Dare Lumber
Deer lumber.
was here and had most everything you needed. And you could get it, and you could call it out and order it, and they would deliver it. In fact, I remember I was going to put new siding and new windows in the house. And so I walked into Dare Lumber. I didn't know anyone there, and I walked in, and there was a very nice man there who I'm still friends with, working behind the counter, and I started to order. And when I got above $2,000, he says, "Oh, you need a builder's discount." And he took me in the back. And, I mean, they were very nice. They saved me something like $700-800 because they gave me, and they didn't have to do that, but they gave me a builder's discount, and they delivered everything. I was really disappointed to see them go under recently. It's really been a hardship to build anything at this time.
Because it sounded like they were very personal and
They were.
friendly
They
and
were.
invested into their community
Mm-hmm.
and the people who chose to live here.
Right. It's very nice. I'm not sure the man was supposed to give me the discount, but he did, and it was very nice.
Yeah, and you probably gave them a lot of business.
I have
because
over
of
the
that.
years.
So it was
Yeah.
a smart business decision.
Yeah.
Did you notice when you actually started, you moved into your Frisco home, did you have, were there any problems with any of the utilities? Did you have did you have to deal with brownouts, or did you always have a pretty consistent power supply, or was that ever an issue?
The power was not as consistent as it is now. I mean, it really wasn't bad. I mean, you had the storms that came and kicked the power out, but you had periodic outages, you know, lightning going up and down, hitting various utilities up and down the island. Services were generally pretty good. We were lucky that we had the Dare County Water Association. We had water from them, so we didn't have to maintain a well, and their water was always good quality. But no, TV was very limited at that point, but it's gotten better too. We still, I guess, if you still have cable, it's still problematic here because you can't get HD TV. But I remember the days when it used to be very nice to come here because they didn't have TV at all. You'd stay at a motel and they would literally crank up an antenna, and you might get 2 stations. But most of the motels didn't have TVs in them at that time.
Is that because they were catered more to fishermen than?
No, it's because you couldn't get TV. They didn't have cable. I remember when they eventually, or somebody bought cable to the island, and down around Dippin' Vet Road back in there somewhere was a big array of antennas, and that's when everybody got TV. I guess they were excited. I wasn't too excited about it.
What about telephone service?
Telephone service has never really been a problem.
So Sharon, when did the two of you decide to relocate a little further north of Frisco to Buxton?
I think it was always a plan to get another place when we moved there, because it was, as George said, a salt box. It had very little storage, and we kept some things in storage until we built this house. And he likes to build, and it was on pilings, and since that road floods either from the sound or the ocean, there was really not a good choice to put in it had a little storage area downstairs, but it wouldn't be a place where you'd want to put building equipment, saws, and that kind of stuff, because it eventually would get flooded. So the idea was to look for a piece of property a little higher, and I think then Buxton was the area because it was closest to the point, and build something where we would have more space and he could have a shop.
Did you find the property yourself, or did you hire a real estate agent to help?
We looked all over. We were living here at the time. We'd been living here about 2 years when we really began to search. Property values were going up as we were looking. It was during that period. So I don't remember when did we bought this lot. Maybe around 2002, 2003. In anticipation of building on it at some future time. Property values had gone up. The lot was not cheap at that time. And so we waited a few years and eventually trying to decide on a plan for the house, and then we finally built in 2007. We were calling around looking for a builder, and Sharon had worked for the Falcon Motel for years, and Ann and Doug Meekins were owners at that time. We called Doug Meekins. He had moved off the island, and called Doug and to ask if he could give us a recommendation for a builder. He said, "Why don't I just come back and build your house for you?" So he did, and that worked out very well.
Did the fact that you're so close to the lighthouse and the point, was that a factor in you deciding this lot, other than it being on a ridge? But
We didn't want to live in a place that had covenants, and there were a lot of lots down in Hatteras Pines. We looked there, and we looked all over Buxton. This was the one we liked. This lot was the one we liked the best. It was relatively high. It is on the ridge. And most of the lot's underwater, but that's all right. There was enough room on the lot to build a house.
Underwater meaning?
It's what they call sedge around here. It's a lot that's about 100 feet by 480 feet deep. So when you look out the window towards the back of the house, towards the lighthouse, it's most of it's underwater.
Yeah. Affords you a lot of privacy.
Yes, and it's like having a nature preserve in your backyard. You get to see the ospreys. Right now we've got the sedge is beginning to dry out, and we've got a lot of white ibis in the backyard.
What else do you see out there?
everything, deer. Every now and then you see some owls at night. You see all kinds of egrets. In the wintertime we get ducks. Of course we've got the nutria, raccoons and possums and lots of snakes. Lots of snakes.
The good and the bad.
Well,
Snakes.
most of them are good snakes. I mean, I don't mind snakes. So, but it's like having a nature preserve in your backyard.
Well, how do you spend your time? It seems like you do travel a little bit with your genealogy, you're investigating your family history. When you're on the island, how do you spend your time?
I fish, but not as much as I did in the past. I'm getting old, and it's harder to walk out to the point every day. I like to kayak and the sound and fish. I don't like kayaking that much, but I like to fish, and the kayak gives you access. I like to go out in the kayak and then wade the flats and fish for trout and whatever's there available.
Can you explain to me what that means? You kayak out past the flats, or?
No, I usually go out north of Buxton.
Okay.
On either go to Kite Point or one of those locations of the first turnout as you leave Buxton, going up north. There's a large hole there that was like a borrow pit where they borrowed sand to fill in the inlet that opened up north of Buxton. So it's relatively deep water, and there are a lot of small trout, not big. Occasionally you catch a nice drum or a larger trout there, but you can catch. Well, I'm thinking trout have to be bigger now in order to keep them. So.
Do you have any secret fishing spots that you want the public to know about, or are there any secret? You just look for the holes.
It's hard to keep anything secret around here. There are people looking. I'm looking. Other people are looking at you and watching you through binoculars, and they see you. You know, you ride through Buxton, and you know people by their vehicles. You see them parked, and you know they're there, and you know what they're doing, and it's a particularly trout fishing. You know, trout fishing is the thing that I'm most sneaky about. But and everybody else is sneaky about their spots too. And they don't remain. I mean, trout move around. The spots change, so you have to move around. But it's hard to keep a secret.
And you're talking about speckled
trout.
Okay.
I mean, it's not unusual to run into somebody in the store or the post office, and they say, "I heard about your fish you caught." And you say, "What?" And there was somebody watching you as you came over the dune with your fish, and they let them know. Word gets out fairly quickly. Also, to be a good trout fisherman, it's not always helpful to keep your spots secret. There's some people you need to share with because they'll share back. So there's a cadre or a group of people that will call and let you know when they're catching fish and how they're catching and what they're doing and invite you in on it. So you can't be too tight-lipped about the fish you're catching if you want people to reciprocate. And you can't be a good trout fisherman unless you're part of that network, really. I mean, or you can if you know their vehicles and see them parked along different places. You get out of your car and go walk over the dune and see what's going on.
Well, what fishing shops in this area do you buy from?
Well,
or maybe just tell me what fishing shops are now available or now open to the fishermen.
The three that I would generally use would be Frisco Rod and Gun in Frisco. I lived there for a long time, and Brian Perry is my next door neighbor, and I like all the Perry clan. And it's a very nice tackle shop. I also use Bob Eakes, Red Drum. I've known Bob for many, many, many years, ever since he even opened his tackle shop. And then Frank Fobbs, Frank and Friends Tackle Shop up in Avon and use that occasionally. That's a little further drive, but I use that on occasion.
And they seem like their business is still pretty good, even with beach closures, and are they still?
I think Brian Perry's business in Frisco is even better since those beaches tend to be more open and they have more beach there. And he's right near the entrance in Frisco on Ramp 49. So I wouldn't be surprised if his business is even better. I know that Bob Eakes has had a downturn in business at the Red Drum Tackle. I see him in his shop more often now, so I think he's had to let some people go and do a little bit more of the work himself.
Is that hard to see? Is that hard to see that happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to see that happen to other people, but it's just hard on me. That's one of the things my life is sort of built around, one of the things I enjoy most. I've had to find other things to do. The interest in genealogy and family genealogy has sort of come out of that. I had to have other things to do to keep me busy. And that's a fun activity. I'm hooked on that.
What do you have any ancestors that are from this area? Have you found or?
Actually, yes. They're not from the Outer Banks, but I did find out that my mother's family originated in the U.S. in Edgecombe County, North Carolina, and that they lived many years over in or near Tarboro, North Carolina, which is not very far away, about a 2-3 hour drive from here. So that I do have ancestors from this area.
Maybe it brought you back to North Carolina.
I don't know if you can say it brought me back, because I discovered this years after.
Well, tell me about the Anglers Club, because I know you're a long member, and Sharon, I think you've been a member of the Cape Hatteras Anglers Club for a while.
Since we moved here.
So was it, when was it founded? Do you remember the history of it?
I know it's over 50 years old, because a few years ago, I think it was 1950, I want to say 56, it was founded. But I can't remember exactly. I wasn't a member from those days. I didn't join until probably 1994 or 5. I had a neighbor when I was down working on my house in Frisco. I had a very nice neighbor who would come down and supervise my work. He had been living here for a good number of years and was retired, and he was a member and had been the director of the annual tournament. And one night, he and his wife came down and invited me to the Anglers Club. And I went, and I said, well, if I'm going to eventually move here, I probably ought to join. So I did, but most of the early days of my membership, I wasn't living here and wasn't here. They don't have meetings during the summertime. So I wasn't able to attend that often. But eventually, when I moved here, I did join and start attending activities.
And what was the mission of the Cape Hatteras Anglers Club? Was it just a social organization at first, or?
No, it used to. Well, it sponsors a fishing tournament. It raises money for scholarships and for other groups on the island. It gives money to the food programs, to the rescue service, to the fire departments, and any other charitable organization. They also give a lot of money to OBPA, which stands for Outer Banks Preservation Association. And one of their roles has always been to try to keep the beaches open. But they do a lot of fundraising things right now. They have a fishing tournament every year that raises money. Have about 120 teams of 6 persons each come and fish. That's a popular event, usually in November. They have bingo. They have dinners and other things to raise money. We also used to have a partnership with the Park Service and offered a program called Fish with the Ranger, which I participated in for many years. And 2 days a week, we would meet with the ranger and have up to 35 participants that would sign up and go out on the beach, and we'd surf fish, usually with a weight and small hooks for small fish. A lot of kids, but a lot of adults also. And we did that for many, many years. We provided the rods and reels and took them out. There's been some talk of attempting to reestablish that program. I hated to see it go because it gave us a relationship with the Park Service, and it also was a great fishing activity for the club to participate in.
It also, I think, helped with the educational component.
Yeah, we were part of the Park Service programs. We were like, they have their interpretive programs that they do. And we actually had someone from the Park Service, a ranger, come and would stand there and fish and talk with the kids and the families. It was a nice program. I really hated to see it go, but when they closed all the beaches, the leadership of the Anglers Club felt that it was a little strange for us to promote a program when people couldn't utilize it or didn't have access to the beaches. So, but it went.
So do you see the Anglers Club continuing to be a major force in this area for providing nonprofit support and education and overseeing or ensuring regulations are followed, or does it seem like to be still a worthwhile and strong?
It's still a worthwhile organization. It's changing. It's becoming more of a fewer and fewer of the people join because of the fishing. They join for lots of other reasons. It is like any service organization in the community, and there are opportunities to do volunteer work in service. The members volunteer in a lot of other programs too. They volunteer delivering food. They in the Coast Guard Auxiliary. So it's a network really for a lot of people to exchange information about what's going on and what's happening. We gossip a lot, I guess you could say, about what's going on and what's happening around the island. It's also an occasion to get together with people and talk and just socialize.
It interconnects you with other
Yes.
Areas in
Right.
the community.
Right.
What other organizations do you belong to, or what are the things that you like to do?
I don't belong to many other organizations. I tend to join those that focus on my narrow interests. But I like to walk and exercise. We have a marvelous recreation center here and recreation program we're lucky to have. That's very nice.
Is that through the county?
It's through the county, through the local Pheasanton Center and Recreation Program. But I like to participate in a number of their programs.
How about you, Sharon? Do you utilize the Pheasanton Center for activities?
Yes, they have a winter walk program I really enjoy. Some of their meal functions we attend. On occasion I've done exercise, participated in an exercise program. I'm currently involved in a reading a book club program that they provide space for. So, and I've used, occasionally when the grandchildren have visited, we've utilized some of the services they provide during the summer there.
So it's been fairly new, the Pheasanton Center and the activities, or has that always been?
It's always
been a part of the community?
Since we moved here. I don't know that much about its history, but since we moved here it was available.
Well, let me switch to hurricanes. How do you prepare for them?
We put up our shutters, cut everything off, and get in the car and leave. We don't like to stay during hurricanes.
At least if it's a mandatory evacuation. Otherwise, we evaluate and usually stay, but we've always left when there was a mandatory evacuation.
Do you, if it's calling for category 1 or 2, do you kind of wait and see, or you just decided to go ahead?
We generally go.
And
There's
is there a
nothing-
reason for that? Just you don't want to get caught stranded and without services?
Don't want to die.
That's a good reason.
The other thing, it's not that we're actually cowards, but we used to live on the beach, and we were there during Hurricane Isabel. We didn't stay; we left. It was coming in as about a Category 3 or a Category 4, and all of our neighbors were planning to leave because we lived on a beach facing the south. And so Sharon and I packed up and left. And then we called back to tell our neighbors that the roads were clear and it was a good time to leave. And they said, oh, it's dropped down to a Category 2 and we're going to stay. And that's when the next day the dunes got washed out and they all had 4.5, 5 feet of water rolling under their houses. A couple of neighbors actually panicked when that began and wanted to leave at that time, but of course they couldn't. Their spouses had to restrain them from going out of the house. There was one couple that literally had to leave the island. She couldn't sleep at night ever again after having witnessed the water coming over the dunes. The way she described it, it's not as though the waves came and broke away the dunes piecemeal and then water began to trickle. She said that she was looking out off her deck. The water all of a sudden rose over the top and started flowing from the ocean to the sound. And by the time she ran around the house to look out the other side, it had already gone under the house and was on its way to the sound. And so I guess it's this, if you live in a place for 10 or 15 years and it seems to be a stable place and then you see it acting up in the worst possible way, you can never get that out of your mind. And she literally couldn't sleep at night. They had to sell their house and move because of the experience. I didn't want that to happen to me.
I don't blame you.
I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to be involved in it.
Where do you go when you do evacuate yourself? Where do you go? Do you stay with family?
It depends. We'll evaluate where it's coming, and we go up and take Highway 64 to 95 and then go north or south, depending on what's happening. We usually stay in a motel and wait to hear. If it's clear and we can get back, that's good. If it's not, we'll may go visit relatives or other things. It's always worked out. But lately, the problem is that the roads usually cut off and you have to wait for them to establish ferry service. And so it's harder and harder to get back on the island if, in fact, you do leave. But there's nothing here that I think is worth my life. If the house gets destroyed, I carry my insurance papers with me. And just don't worry about it.
Since you've been here, is Isabel the worst one that you've experienced that you remember? Or?
No, there have been some pretty bad ones. The one, I think Isabel was the worst. We even, there was one little hurricane that we missed. I think it was called Albert or Alex or something like that.
It was an A, yeah.
It was an A, one of the first ones in the season. And Sharon and I had decided one day we were going to go visit some historic sites in inland North Carolina. So we packed up and went. It was a rainy day, and there was a little tropical depression off South Carolina. We were gone a day and a half and turned around to come back home, and we couldn't get home. That little tropical depression had turned into a Category 2 hurricane overnight, and they didn't. But we were gone for that one too. We had to stay in Manio overnight because we couldn't get back down the island. And that wasn't a bad hurricane, but there were about 300 cars that got towed off the island after that one. They're coming from, because it had flooded both Ocracoke and Hatteras Village. A couple of houses that burned down because of the cars under the houses getting inundated by salt water and catching fire. But that was a strange one. and we missed it. But it didn't do much damage to housing, but they didn't have, you know, it was height of early tourist season. Everything was crowded. They didn't do a mandatory evacuation because they didn't have time. It's one of those odd little things that happens.
So sometimes you can't prepare.
Yep, you can't prepare.
Just part of life down
Yeah.
there.
And for days after that, you saw truck after truckload of cars being taken away because of been damaged by the salt water.
I want to conclude. I have 3 questions to ask the 2 of you. The first one is, what concerns you the most about living here? Concerns meaning things you maybe don't like as much.
Well, as my concern is, as you get older, you need more and more healthcare services. And the road is out more and more often here for longer and longer periods of time. And I don't know if that problem's ever going to be solved. Rise in sea level and other kinds of things. It seems that storms do more damage. The other concern is we have fairly good primary care physicians right now, but if that becomes threatened and we lose our primary health care, I would think about moving. I mean, at some point, this is not a good place to live if you're infirm and have lots of health problems. So I'm willing to put up with the hurricanes and other things, but lack of health care is something that would make me think about moving away and maybe coming in to visit or maybe renting here. But
So that's important.
that's important.
Have an adequate medical care.
Yeah, and there'll be some point where it won't be adequate, or when you have to. The last few years to get secondary health care or specialist services, you have to go off island, and it's been problematic to get off, particularly when the road's out and you have to wait for a ferry. Some of the people in Nags Head are very nice in terms of giving you breaks on hotel rooms and overnight stays, but you have to take sometimes 2 or 3 days just to plan a healthcare visit in order to get off. That's becoming a bit of a nuisance.
What about you, Sharon? Is there anything
I
that
think
bothers
access, same kinds of things George said, and I guess the Bonner Bridge might be the fact that it has not been replaced, and there's not a firm timeline as to when that will happen. That would probably be my largest specific access focus. But the access and on down the line, the healthcare thing possibly might be a concern.
I like better access to the beaches. I mean, that's really, every now and then I get depressed about that, but I decide, no, I'm just not, I don't talk about it to people oftentimes anymore, because it just
upsets you?
It upsets me.
Because it takes away the very thing that brought you here.
It's not just the fishing. Fishing is a social occasion here at Hatteras Island. When you go out and fish, we talked about keeping secrets of secret fishing places. Usually you go and there are people you know there, and you talk and you meet. There used to be large numbers of people, say for example, that I used to come here in early June for a week, and there were lots of other people that would come at the same time, and we would meet out on the beach every year, and it would be like a reunion. You just don't have those opportunities, so it's really cuts down on your social life as well as just fishing as an activity. So that's a major part of it. It's not like you're out there in isolation.
Well, what is it that, what do you love most about being here?
I still love the fishing. You know, when you can do it, when you have access to it. I look forward to August when they open the beaches back up. I take a lot more trips. Living here used to be like a full-time vacation, but now I take more trips elsewhere. think next winter, we're even talking about going to Florida for a while to vacation. But it's just not like it used to be.
But fishing is still your love.
Right, and it's not just the access to the beaches. The quality of fishing has declined. People don't really realize that. It's amazing. I remember one day in Avon, right north of the Avon Pier during the winter, walking out on the beach, and there was a big school of menhaden in the slough. And under the menhaden were both striped bass up to 30 pounds and a few bluefish. And there were 3 humpback whales right up next to the beach, lunging through the menhaden, eating. I mean, where else in the world are you going to see that? Or have that kind of really just experience? But you don't experience those things as often. When the schools of menhaden used to come, there were just millions of birds here, millions of birds feeding on them. They would show up and just line the shore. And being out on the beach, I can remember being out on the beach and waiting for the bluefish to show up, and all of a sudden seeing big openings. You can literally see the black schools of menhaden. They turn the water black, and seeing them opening up and seeing bluefish just blitzing the beach and hitting up and down the beach for about a 10-mile sector, and just catching them till your arms were sore. And you just don't see those kinds of things anymore.
It's like you're witnessing the beauty of nature.
I mean, yeah, it's just, they're like peak experiences in your life. And I mean, I think about them now and just, it makes you feel good to have seen and witnessed those kinds of events. You just don't see those kinds of things as often, or just to go out to the point and see the schools of Spanish mackerel or bluefish blitzing bait. It's just an amazing thing to see. There may be a lot of people on the beach, but you have your back to them, and you can just sit there.
Sharon, about you?
The beach environment, just the beauty of this area, the laid-back, slow pace of the area. I like walking on the beach. I enjoy being out there, but I also love, we have a screened-in back porch here at the house, which looks out on the sedge, and like George said, it's like your own nature preserve. And this time of year, I'm sitting out there every day reading, listening to the sounds you hear. It's so peaceful, that kind of thing. And my neighbors, the other neighborhood in Frisco was so nice. The neighbors we had, there was a good bit of rental there, so there were people in and out, but you had your full-time residents. And Flowers Ridge, the neighbors we've met here, it's just a nice little community. So all of that, the social aspect, the environment.
I love the fact that you get to know everybody in town. It's a small town, particularly during the winter time. It's a small town, and you go into the stores and you know the people who are waiting on you. You go to the post office and you've got to leave at least 15 minutes time so you can socialize with people you're going to run into. And you run into people all over town. You can't go anywhere. You can't go to the store. You can't go anywhere without running into people that you know. And that's nice. Remember when I was young, I probably wouldn't want to live in a small town because everybody knew your business. Now I live in one and I'm glad they know my business. I don't really care, and I'm glad I know about them. And gossip travels fast here. But it's mainly out of concern, not maliciousness. So it's a very nice town to live in.
Well, my third question was, what keeps you here? But I think you just answered it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was beautifully said. And I'm looking at your screen porch, Sharon, and I see the beautiful Cape Hatteras Lighthouse.
Mm-hmm.
So you have that as a daily image in your logs.
We have a nightly image too.
And a nightly image.
It blinks every 7.5 seconds.
Well, I wanted to thank you guys for taking the time to interview. So
thank you.
It was really nice. You were full of information, so I appreciate it.
Pleasure.